if I can slow myself down enough, the answers are always in there. And this is what I teach my clients. It's really about learning to trust yourself so that you can love yourself, and not even so that trust yourself and love yourself.
Yeah.
But too often we don't get quiet enough to hear what's really going on. So if we can slow down and get quiet, the answers are all in there.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Today, we welcome to the podcast Laurie Shiers. She's a creativity coach who believes that creativity has the power to heal our lives and change the world. Clearly, a woman after my own heart. She helps her clients uncover fresh insights and possibilities, develop powerful habits, and ultimately create meaningful and lasting change. Reconnecting with her innate sense of joy and wonder is what busted open the door to Laurie's own personal transformation and happiness and fulfillment. Laurie began her professional creative career as an actor. But she chose to pivot into marketing and copywriting when she faced significant struggles with her inner critic and developed an unhealthy need for external validation. As she continued to work as a shadow artist, making content for other people, she still couldn't shake this nagging feeling that she was still out of alignment. She pushed through everything until personal tragedy forced her to step back and reevaluate everything. In this episode, Laurie goes into how aligning her business with her ideal lifestyle helped her discover her greater personal fulfillment, as well as how to better be of service to her community and her clients, and ultimately herself. Join us as we delve into what it could look like if we stop and created the space we needed to hear and learn to trust our inner voice. For more on Laurie, you can check her out at laurieshiers.com. That's Laurie, SHIERS.com, or on Instagram at Brainchild Coaching. Welcome, Laurie, to the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So you and I had the privilege of meeting during an incredible ongoing project that brought people together who were committed to exploring their own creativity, as particularly their own creativity as a tool for some type of transformation in their lives. And I was really moved by the story that you shared about your own creative transformation and the work that you're doing in the world. And when I, of course, Googled, and I wouldn't say stalked, but I'm going to go with researched you, I uncovered a whole world of creativity from your past as an actress, a more traditional actress, all the way to the work that you're doing now with coaching and supporting people and being able to essentially create the lives that feel the most true and aligned and empowering for them. So I am so excited to hear all of these aspects of your creative self.
I can't wait to tell you. And if you must know, I did a little bit of research on you too before we connected. I was so excited to talk to you. So I feel like it's meant to be that we're sitting here having this conversation now.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So to just start us off here, for people who are not familiar with you or the work that you're doing, can you give us a little bit of context about how you show up in the world at this point?
Yes. So my work primarily is with creatives, people who are professional creatives already, who have spent their time and their talent working on projects with and for other people. And they're finally ready to launch and do their own thing. And sometimes that means a whole new career. And sometimes it means just taking on a new project and having the courage to see it through.
Mm-hmm.
So often the work is around mindset with creatives. And so we dig in there and also, explore the creative process and identify where in their lives they are not using their creativity to the fullest extent and kind of bring that into full bloom.
Yeah. When you speak about creativity, can you give us a sense of how specifically you define that? Because I think a lot of people just by default think of creativity as a synonym for being artistic, like traditionally artistic.
Yes. And I don't subscribe to that. I mean, creativity is creating something new that hasn't been there before. And sometimes that's putting two disparate pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's adding on and building something, but it doesn't necessarily mean, painting the Sistine Chapel or, carving the David. It's not necessarily, when I define creativity, I don't define it just as fine art. Yeah. It's really in the way that you live your life. Mm-hmm. I happen to love people who identify as artists. I think that they are always intriguing. That's who I gravitate towards. But when talking about creativity in general, that applies to all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we can all be more creative in how we live and how we approach our day and how we approach the problems that need solving and how kind we are to ourselves and one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every day we're creating our lives.
Absolutely. That's the exact same philosophy and even verbiage that I use to describe creativity, with the goal and intention of making it feel less elitist, right? Like not everybody, in fact, I would say almost nobody could paint the Sistine Chapel, right? Like that's such a unlikely thing to aspire to that feels so inaccessible for a lot of people. And I think what I really want to get into a lot in this podcast is around creativity and mindset. But I think part of the foundational work of being able to open somebody up to the full power of their creativity is helping them understand all of the places that creativity lives and all the different ways that it can show up in their life and contribute to exactly what you said, creating your life every single day.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So before we get too deep into the work that you're doing now, I would love to hear about your personal journey. Can you share a little bit about your relationship with creativity in your early years?
Of course. Yes. I feel like creativity saved my life, to be honest with you. I was a very introverted, tiny little Jewish girl in a neighborhood of kids who had never seen a Jew before. And I was bullied so much on a block where there were kids that were all bigger and older than me. And sometimes they wanted to play, and a lot of times they didn't want to play. And I was a very, very sensitive kid, and I would go home to my journal and I would write, the stories of what I wanted to happen. And I would write different endings to things that did happen. And I would write poetry, and I would just write everything. And that was my safe and happy place. Sometimes I would draw pictures that would go with the stories, but mostly I would read and write. And that was my happy place. There were other expressions of it, acting and then doing some dancing. I'm a terrible dancer. I'm a mediocre singer, but none of that stopped me from doing all of it. It was just in my blood. And I needed to have some form of creative expression at all times. Yeah. So the writing and the journaling was really the foundation of everything, but a lot bloomed out of that. Mm-hmm. And, I wasn't super close with my parents. My dad was really, really challenging and not supportive of me doing anything in the arts. Mm-hmm. And so I also always felt like I kind of had to hide that part of myself.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. So it was subverted, but it wasn't stopped. I mean, mm-hmm. I couldn't stop it.
Yeah. When you felt that you had to suppress that, it sounds like your writing was something that happened in isolation, and it was your safe space and the place where only you were. So can you share a little bit about how you went from the private, introverted, bullied, kind of more fearful place in your life to then bringing your creativity out into the public in the form of these more performative expressions of creativity? How did you make that leap?
You know what? I have this very early memory of creating potions in my mom and dad's bathroom and then performing commercials for them in front of the mirror. and there was always a little bit of a performative bug in me.
Yeah.
And when I reflect on what that was about, mm-hmm. I think it was really trying to be someone else. And I was under that spell for a really long time. Some of it was joyful mm-hmm. in the exploration of it. And then when I got older and I was, a working actor and auditioning, it just started to feel harmful. It didn't feel good anymore. It felt like I was comparing myself so much to everyone else. I had a hard time getting out of that frame of mind. Mm-hmm. And I realized that I needed to know myself better. This is many, many years later, but I needed to understand who I was, and I needed to get comfortable in my own skin as opposed to trying to escape and be someone else by, playing a character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really profound, and very conscious realization that a lot of people end up hitting rock bottom before they're able to have that perspective and really come to realize that there's a disconnect between who I really am and the way that I'm showing up in the world. So how did you get to a place where you could have that realization? What was your journey there?
I really think that's hindsight speaking, because in the moments it was just so painful, and it was, I was out of alignment, and I wasn't getting the jobs. And I don't think that's the only reason that it showed up that I was out of alignment, but I wasn't booking jobs. I was starting to not feel good about it. And, I knew I needed to try something else. Like my soul told me I needed to just get myself out of the situation where I was putting myself up for judgment and external validation as my job. That didn't feel great. Mm. And the person I am today, I think, would approach acting in that world very, very differently. But as a young girl growing up in LA and the influences that I had, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see that there was a different way to approach it. So I left. The journey from there was still working in creative fields and still using my writing now. Mm. But I left the acting world behind when I was in my mid-20s.
Mm-hmm. When you made the decision to do that, did it feel like a loss of any kind, or did it feel like a liberation? Or maybe it was some sort of combination, or
it was a combo platter. It was for sure a combo platter. Yeah. I mean, I think at the core where I have my gifts are with words and writing. It's not necessarily as a theatrical talent. And so it felt a little freeing to just be able to leave that behind. Yeah. And there was, of course, some mourning with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you able to use your writing or your creativity to help you process that experience or move through that experience?
I think so. It's funny as we talk about this journey of creative recovery. I think that the leaving acting behind was a bump in the road, but it wasn't the thing. It wasn't the rock bottom for me. It was a transition because after I left acting, there was so much in my career that was fulfilling. I've done some weird and fun things in my career, and one of them was co-creating the very first episodic website online, and it was really fun and really creative. I was writing 3 different characters, and I was the face of one of them, and that was super fun, and it felt weirdly adjacent to acting, but not necessarily doing all the things. And gosh, I feel like this is such a long story, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole telling you all the things, but that was a really interesting piece. And then I from there, over a long period of time, transitioned from owning a company to working in advertising and copywriting.
Yeah.
And that was a love for a while. Then the shine started to wear off. I mastered the skills that I needed. I worked with a lot of really interesting clients. And at the end of the day, I started to feel really, really empty. And all of the writing that I had done as a little girl, I just stopped doing that, and I channeled it into all my client work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that, I really think I started to lose my way. I started to become untethered from my creative heart and from the writing the words that meant something to me, and, using them to sell protein bars and stuff. So again, I began feeling like I was out of alignment again, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with that, but I knew that my time in advertising was coming to an end. It was clear that I didn't want to own an agency. I didn't want to be the creative director and owner. So I was beginning to explore very peripherally what something else might look like. And right at the beginning of that process, my little brother, who I was very close to, died unexpectedly. And that was it.
Yeah.
Like, that was the breaking point.
Yeah.
That was, there was before Robbie and then everything after. And the world looked different. And I knew I could not do life the way I was doing it before.
I was just going to ask if you feel comfortable to share more about what it felt like to be in that place, like to be in the lost place, and then how you were able over time and maybe with other resources, tools, support, whatever, to then start to explore what life after Robbie might look like.
Yeah. It was a dark, dark year. I had been working at an agency, and I don't remember. I think I just stopped showing up, or I showed up for a while, and then I showed up for a while, and then they were like, "Okay, you need to go to bed, Laurie. Like, this is not working." And I just left. I let everything fall away, and I knew that I was done with that life. And I looked back at, one of the big lessons that my brother's passing taught me was that we only have right now, and that there's not another time to do all the things that we've always dreamed about doing. Right now is the time to do that. And so I had to reconnect with what was important to me. If it wasn't just being creative, what was it? And it was really wanting to be of service. And so I went back. I grew up with going to therapy starting at 13. And the therapist honestly changed my trajectory, helped me create wonderful relationships with men and my husband, who's an awesome human. This would not have happened if I hadn't had a corrective male figure starting so young.
Yeah.
So I went back to him, and I just wanted to have a conversation about where I belonged in this world. And he and I talked for a long time about, he saw me just going right into therapy, going back to school and doing that.
Yeah.
And ultimately
going into therapy, meaning to become a therapist.
Yeah. Becoming a therapist.
Yeah.
And the minute he said it, I burst into tears. It was like he got me, he got that spot. And ultimately, I ended up going back to school and deciding that I wanted to become a coach instead of a therapist. I went into this program that I needed to finish some credits for my bachelor's degree, not many, but a few. I found this program where those credits would kind of be rolled into a master's program where I would get my my master's in psychotherapy. So I jumped into that program, and what I learned quickly in the first semester was that it's a wonderful school, but it's not for people who want a career. It's just for personal development kind of work. Mm-hmm. So I began looking at what the other options were for a school that is kind of a feeder into going right into private practice or not private practice, but practice. And as I was doing this, my husband was finally ready to do it too. Mm-hmm. And so it looked like the two of us were going to be simultaneously pursuing this path, being full-time parents and working. And it just got to be too much. Yeah. So it ultimately was a blessing, because as my husband was going through the program, he would come home and tell me all the things that he was learning. It was so interesting, but I became very clear that I didn't want to be in the room with that, 40 hours a week. It was a lot of trauma, a lot of that. And because of what I learned from my brother's passing, I was not going to sit in the sidelines and wait for something to happen or change. So I went right into a coaching program and unsure at that moment if I was going to enjoy it, if it was my thing. And at first I was sure it wasn't. And then I was sure that it was.
Funny how that happens.
Yeah. I was like, what? Oh, now I get it. So, it's the perfect place for me. I love working with people on where they are right now and how they're moving forward. And of course, we always touch into where these things come from. Yeah. But my husband is doing the trauma work and the deep work, and that's exactly what he is designed to do. So we make a good match set that way. Yeah. But I skipped over the year. The year was just, I think I slept and drank through the year. 2 months after Robbie died, I had already registered for school. I was going to start somehow. I didn't know how. And then one morning, right around that time, I was reading my son a book. He was in kindergarten. He had just started, and I was sitting reading a book at the breakfast table, and I had my hand on my face, and I read something that was funny, and we both laughed, and I couldn't feel my face underneath my hand. And I thought I was having a stroke. Wow. And it was so scary. And I don't know how I did it, but I got him to school and I drove myself to the emergency room, and I was not having a stroke. It was Bell's palsy. Oh, wow. So the right side of my face was completely frozen. It was starting to freeze. Yeah. And that's a nerve thing that happens. And I think it can happen when your immune system has been compromised, as mine had been. I was just shot. Yeah. So my year was, not great. And I came out of it on the other side with a new outlook, a new respect for life, and a new focus on, how I wanted to serve and who I wanted to serve.
That's so fascinating about how your own journey, like the lowest lows in your life, is what helps fortify you and reorient you to how you can best serve other people. I think there's something really powerful about transformation, because certainly when you're in it, it doesn't feel like that at all. You just feel the weight. You just feel the heaviness. It's just the darkness. But what's so fascinating to me and why I'm so interested in these types of stories is because it almost feels like there's some type of magic that then enters the space that allows you to say, I'm ready now. I'm ready to get out of bed. I'm ready to, put this thing that helps numb me out away. Like I'm ready to start to re-enter, even though I have no idea how to do that. I have no idea what path I'm walking. I don't even know where true north is anymore at this point. But you have these nuggets of wisdom that you are able to collect from the rubble of your life, right? And it sounds like one of them for you was service and the other was presence. Like, how do I help bring these two gems together in order to both fulfill who I am and live in alignment with me, but also in a way to honor what has been lost?
Absolutely. And that's beautifully said. And how I feel when I'm doing my work every day. I feel like I'm honoring my brother. And I feel like, I'm honoring the girl who I was growing up too, because my writing is just back alive in me, and it's work that I'm doing every day. I'm working on a new book. I published one last year. And it feels really good to bring those two things together.
Yeah. So can you take us through a little bit of your work and what that experience is like to bring those worlds together? And I would love if you could speak also about the book that you wrote, because that's huge. Writing a book and publishing a book is not something that happens by accident. It's something that requires a really strong will and a really strong mission and commitment, right? You have something to say that feels critically important, that the world hears it. So can you share a little bit about how you're able to roll all of this up into the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, for sure. I'll try and tell you in a linear way.
It doesn't have to be linear. This is creativity.
Okay. So a few years ago, I was with a writing group called The Long Table in LA. It was fantastic. And there'd be a writing prompt every week. And I was writing in first person, and a lot of it was memoir kind of stuff. And I was developing this voice, unconsciously as I told these stories. And the feedback that I was getting from the group was really great. I started to look at the work and I wanted to play with it more. So I shifted at some point from first person to third person. And doing that gave me a lot of creative freedom. I suddenly didn't need to be tied to the facts on the ground. I could make things up. My imagination went wild. And I ended up rewriting some of the stuff that I had written in first person. And I put all of these pieces together in a compilation and looked at it and went, I'm not sure what this is. Is it a book of short stories? Is it a book of, does it all tie together as a novel? It's unclear. And so I got stuck. Like I was really getting stuck. And so as a side, hobby, I started to find out how other artists got out of their own way. And I kept like a running log, and I was finding quotes and different things. And at some point I looked, and I think I had 25 or 30 different, Hemingway boxed, Flea likes to run. Okay. That's a movement thing. And finding all these different ways of people, the people help themselves get out of their own way. So at some point when I had a bunch of them, I realized maybe this is actually a thing. So I turned the thing into a thing, which is called creative block. And it's a square bamboo box that has 101 prompts, 101 ways to get out of your own way. And so now when I get stuck, or when anyone gets stuck, they can grab a card and pull it out. So I made that.
Yeah.
And that's like on Etsy and it's on Amazon.
Before you go on to the next part of your story, would you mind just pulling a card? I'm curious what types of prompts they are. I'd love to experience it.
Okay. So have in mind, I like to do this like tarot. So have in mind something that you're working with.
Do I share it with you or should I keep it for myself?
It's totally up to you.
Mm-hmm. I am thinking about how I can evolve the work that is coming up through this podcast into different products that I can offer to my community, but I'm not sure what the product should be or in which order they should come. And I find myself going back and forth between wildly inspired, I have all of the ideas, to then feeling like, oh no, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know exactly what needs to come first. I'm just going to get paralyzed by indecision.
Okay. All right. Now we know what we're working with. That's good. Okay. So I will just pull this one. Oh, okay. This one says go easy. To avoid burnout and find clarity when you're working on a project. Author and entrepreneur Tim Ferriss regularly asks himself, what would it look like if this were easy? Answer this simple question for yourself right now and then get to it.
Oh, wow. What would it look like if it was easy? I would stop overthinking it and I would just take the first step and trust that the rest of the steps would be revealed to me as I continue momentum.
Nice.
Yeah.
What is that first step?
Probably a class that I would put on Skillshare because I don't have to build out a whole course. I don't have to do the full launch marketing plan. I don't need to pay for my own infrastructure. And it's a way for me to tap into the communities and the people that I want to serve, which are creatives who are interested in also creative entrepreneurship.
Look at that. That came fast.
Damn, you're good. Okay, I'm going to buy one of these boxes later.
Okay, awesome. But tell me, what's the next teeny baby step to making that Skillshare class real?
Outline the class, do the slides, record it. It's so interesting because this morning, I was writing my morning pages, a practice I picked up from Julie Cameron's Artist Way.
Yes, I do it too.
Yeah. And I wrote like 5 or 6 pages this morning of lots of ideas. Like there was so much that came through, but in that coming through, it does feel like tarot. Like that was the exact card that needed to be pulled. Tim Ferriss is a huge influence in my life. I aspire a lot of the stuff that I'm doing. He really inspires me, and I aspire to be like him in many ways, not all the ways, but in many ways. And the problem that I struggle with is not opportunity or creativity. What I struggle with is decision making and commitment. So that is exactly what I heard in that card of like, you don't need to know the sun, the moon, and the stars. Like take the first step, do something small. You know, what would it look like if you didn't have to think about all of the things and how it all fits together before you even take that first step?
That's it.
That was exactly what I needed to hear.
I'm so glad. And you are totally my people.
Yeah.
I feel you. Yes.
With that magical mini experience that I just had, I am so curious about what other formats your support of creatives have been able to roll up into.
I was at a coaching intensive, and I just had the first creative blocks, and I was thinking about how I was going to position them, and I was talking about it with my small group, and everyone in the group said, "This sounds interesting. Why don't you show us what you're talking about?" Yeah. And so the next day I showed up with, I think 3 blocks. There were 3 out of 10 that I already had. And I started talking about it and showing people in the group. And one girl took it out of my hand. She said, "Sold."
Yeah.
How much? I'm not giving it back to you.
Yeah.
And that's not what I was expecting. But the other person in the group said really intensely, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. And it turned out that he had a podcast that he wanted to turn into a book.
Oh.
And after reading the stuff that I've written for the creative block and how I've done all of that, he and I collaborated and brought that book to life. And it's called Mindset Mondays.
Mindset Mondays. Why is it called Mindset Mondays? What's the significance of that?
His podcast is called Mindset Mondays. And he would, every Monday, he would do a podcast that would bring a new quote from somebody famous or infamous, and sometimes, random people, but a quote that spoke to a state of mind that you could try on for the week. And so every Monday, it kind of kicked things off with this idea. It was more of a conversation than just a lecture. So he did this on Facebook Live. And it became a popular thing, and he wanted a companion piece to go with that.
How cool.
So we worked together on that, and now that's alive and in the world too. So that's where I am. And now the book that I had started with, the story that I was telling you about, this memoir, it's called Reinventing Eloise, and it's still a work in progress. What I've learned is that it's, I think I've written 12 stories in one book. So now I'm teasing them out and I'm turning them into their own thing.
Wow. And who or what is Eloise?
She may or may not be my alter ego.
Oh.
It's from the perspective of a 12-year-old girl. It's recreating her own life.
Wow. And are you channeling your 12-year-old self through this process?
Yeah, totally. And as the mother of a 13-year-old boy, I get to kind of live in that world too right now. So it's a sweet spot.
Yeah. The last thing that you said just really captured my interest. So I'm just going to go with that.
Right.
When you are oscillating back and forth between embodying and channeling your teenage self while simultaneously being a parent to a teenager, how are you seeing the similarities and the differences around your development and your son's development, around, particularly in the vein of creativity?
Oh, we are so different. We are so very, very different. First of all, being a boy, he does not want to talk about anything. There's a lot of internal stuff happening. And when he was young, he drew all the time. And now he says he's not good at it and he doesn't like to do it. And it is heartbreaking for me. Yeah. I do everything I can to encourage it, and then and model it, and model the fact that it doesn't need to be, creativity is not about you being good at it. It's about you doing it for the love. So I have a lot of faith that it will come around when it's the right time for him. And I have to, check myself too, because he's a different person and he's got his own interests and his own talents that he's already, tapped into and aware of, and they're fantastic. Yeah. It's just different. It's different.
Creative expression is certainly unique to each individual, right? You can't impose your style of creativity onto somebody else. But the part that seems to be present in at least everybody that I've spoken to around this, and what you just shared about why your son is feeling like he doesn't want to engage in that type of creative expression, is around this concept of being skilled, being good, that ultimately kind of boils down into being worthy. right? I'm not worthy of
Yeah.
pursuing this unless I'm really good at this. And what good looks like is I have a high level of skill that other people recognize and appreciate. And then when we become adults, then it's the added layer of they also paid me for it.
That's right. That's right. And there's this really interesting study that was done by Dr. George and NASA that was originally developed to predict creativity and creative thinking for potential astronauts. It was so effective that they created a similar test for children to see if they could measure creativity. And what they discovered was when they tested young kids, like I want to say like 4-year-olds, the percentage of kids that ranked as creative genius was 98%. Yeah. Are you familiar with this study?
Yeah, but keep going. I love it. I mean, I could hear about this all day.
I mean, 98%. So essentially almost all of us are ranking as creative geniuses. Yeah. And they continued the study because it was so fascinating with kids who were, 10 years old, 15 years old, and adults. And the numbers dropped drastically. I mean, I think it was like 33% by the time we were 10 or 15. Yeah. And then by the time we're adult, it's some minuscule percentage. And it's not because we don't have it in us. It's because of the way that we've been educated. Yeah. And the way that we've been educated about how to process is by separating convergent and divergent thinking. I'm sorry, by teaching it together. Mm-hmm. So, convergent meaning bringing things together, and divergent meaning coming up with all the different ideas. Yeah. So when we're little and we're told to, paint a giraffe with wings when we're 5 years old, we're like, great, we'll paint a giraffe with wings and we'll color the wings and they'll be sparkly and fantastic. But when you ask a 15-year-old, same thing. Because of the way that we've been taught to be discriminating as we're creating, a 15-year-old will say, a giraffe doesn't have wings. Yeah. I'm not going to do that. So, part of it for me and thinking about it, and also with working with clients, it's like, how do we separate these thought processes? How do we make sure that we have the time to fully write our hearts out before we even bring in the editor? How do we separate our processes so that we can shut off or circumvent the voices, so knowing that we'll get to all that stuff later, but doing so allows us to be fully creatively expressed. Yeah. And not doing so squashes it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm trying to remember where I first heard this. It might have been from, a woman who I really appreciate her creative work that's very closely linked to emotional intelligence work. Her name's Amber Ray. And she talks about how we, in creative projects, there are 3 separate, I think she refers to them as personas, right? But you have to embody them. There is the artist, there is the editor, and then there's the promoter. And those are 3 separate roles and happen in separate phases. Yep. That when you try to put them all together, you end up just not being able to make progress on anything. That's and right. Doing everything sort of at a way, way lower quality. Yep. And what the artist wants is to just be expressed. Right. That's the divergent thinking. That's all of these ideas. That's all of the things that we start and we don't finish. It's the Post-its we put on the wall. It's the scribbles on paper we have laying around everywhere. Like, it's very expansive. The editor then says, okay, artist, are you ready for me to have a look and really start giving this some shape? And once the artist says, okay, yeah, I'm ready to move to the next phase, then you're able to embody the editor. And the editor's like, okay, let's kind of trim the edges a little bit. Let's prune this into something that's really going to be resonant and not have all these distracting kind of things floating around. Then once the editor's like, okay, I feel pretty good about this package, then it goes to the promoter. And the promoter persona, or the one that you step into, is all about making it resonate with the audience. So there's some of that happens obviously during the editing process, during the artistic process, but the promoter's really, that role is like, cool, I made this thing. Now, how do I get other people to know about it, see the value in it, and engage with it? And so having that understanding that these are three separate things for me has been a really important framework in helping me understand where I'm at in the process and what part of me is most needed in that stage.
It's so crucial to understand that. I think it's so helpful. And it's also, I think, helpful to remember that we're not all good at them equally.
Right.
You know, they are skills that we can learn. And if you're just coming at it raw, like that, you're going to have a tendency where, you know, I'm really good to just rip out the ideas, and maybe I'm not so good sometimes as an editor, you know?
Yeah.
But they're all learnable and teachable skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other place I wanted to dive into with this conversation, and we mentioned very briefly Julia Cameron and The Artist's Way, but I would love to explore with you this whole concept of the shadow artist. So for people who aren't familiar with that term, a shadow artist in simplest terms, and please, Laurie, add to this if I miss something important, but the way I understand the shadow artist, which I learned about through Julia Cameron's work, The Artist's Way, is these are the people who are just peripherally around the fully expressed embodied artists. A lot of times they show up as the editors or as the agents or as the promoters or, you know, as the designers. It's the people that are on the team of the person who is bringing their creative vision to life. And you play a helping role. You're like the right hand man or woman of the project rather than the director. Yeah. So in your experience, particularly working with commercial creativity or commercial artists, how do you see this whole shadow artist concept playing out in both your own experience and then in the work that you're doing with other creatives?
I can tell you that I willingly stepped into the role of shadow artist when I jumped into the advertising world. Yeah. And that was fine with me. And I think, you know, this is about knowing your strengths and your place. A lot of people they want to be an editor. They study to be an editor, whatever the background position is we're talking about. And that's their jam. Like that's where they thrive. Then there's people like me and a lot of my clients who I spent a lot of time doing for others what I really, truly wanted to do for myself and my own vision. And, you know, it got painful. It got too painful for me to do that for much longer. And that was an awareness that's really come to me in the last 5 years. And I'm very conscious now when I take on a project, because I'll take on different kinds of creative projects in addition to doing coaching and my own writing. But I have to be very careful and conscious about the reasons why I'm doing it. Without that piece, you know, you start to feel out of alignment. There's a value there that's definitely being stepped on when I'm doing exactly for someone else what I feel like I should be and want to be doing for myself. Yeah.
Do you have a framework that you've developed to help you kind of kick the tires of a project to see if it meets that criteria or not? Or is it just like an intuition, a feeling?
You know, I mean, I have a meditation practice and a writing practice that generally will inform the direction. So it's those are like the tent poles, and then really doing some listening. Like really checking in with if there's something that I really believe in that's not being honored, or, you know, that sounds heady. Like if I can slow myself down enough, the answers are always in there. And this is what I teach my clients. It's really about learning to trust yourself so that you can love yourself, you know, and not even so that trust yourself and love yourself. Yeah. But too often we don't get quiet enough to hear what's really going on. Yeah. So if we can slow down and get quiet, and I'm speaking to myself too, when I can slow down and get quiet, the answers are all in there. It's not out there.
That's such a reoccurring theme in my own life and in these conversations that I'm having with other people. Yeah, it is that return to self and learning how to listen, right? Because like you shared early on in the podcast around your feelings when you were going to auditions and doing all this stuff, all the feelings of comparison and imposter syndrome, and I should do this or I should be that. And I think when we allow that kind of energy to run unchecked in us for a long time, it creates extra noise and voices in that channel that it becomes harder and harder to know which one is the voice of my intuition versus which one is the voice of my inner critic or, some cultural thing that I might have picked up outside of me. I would love to learn a little bit more about your experience learning to identify which of those voices in the channel was the one worth listening to and which were the ones that didn't warrant that same attention.
Yeah, it's a good question. I just love you. I think you're so great at this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You really are. And you're so engaged and engaging. It's great.
Oh, yes. It's so funny. It's like even the imposter syndrome and all of this kind of stuff, like nobody is outside of that. I'm so self-critical and I look at the things that I wish I would have done better. And it for me too, taking that step back and being with myself and really dropping in, I learn how to let those critical voices kind of float away because I can feel that who cares if it takes me 45 seconds to ask a question instead of 10 seconds. I'm verbose. I'm long-winded. It's okay. Regardless of that piece of it, the resonance is there. The impact is there. The feelings are there. And the skills that maybe I'm lacking skills, maybe it's just my style. I don't know. We'll see over time. That is the part that can be developed over time, just like any other skill. So it's always so important to me to have a community and have other people who I trust, who are on that same journey around me, because they can give me perspective that I'm lacking. And I can do the same for them this, in a way, it's like I'm kind of answering the question that I asked you for myself of like, how do I let go of the inevitable comparison and all this kind of stuff that comes up and really stay connected to, no, I'm on the path. I'm in alignment. My skills will improve, all of this other stuff. So thank you for helping reflect that back to me because I need it just like everybody else. Nobody has it all figured out.
We all do. You're so right. You're so right. For me and for the people I work with, like there's the thing that happens that triggers you, right? And then there's your reaction to it. And then there's your reaction to the reaction to it. So what I like to try and do is create space between the thing that happens and how you ultimately respond to it. And you can do this, by creating something that some people call sacred pause. It's just really stretching that space out. Yeah. So there's a great acronym that my husband, who's also a mindfulness teacher, uses. The word is STOP. And it's an acronym for stop, take a breath, or 5, observe. So observe what's happening in your mind. What's the circumstance? And then proceed. Proceed, with kindness and gentleness and without judgment. Yeah. And the way that I like to do that process is by getting back into my body. Yeah. We forget we're animals. Like this body needs us, and there's so much wisdom in it. So, if I can sit quietly and connect to my senses. So the sense of what I'm hearing, or even just the feeling of my hands touching something, just really getting back into my physical body. That's my stop. That's my stop, happy place, and then from there, then you get to go to what Shirzad Shamin, who wrote Positive Intelligence, who's a wonderful, wonderful teacher, calls it, is you get to be in blameless discernment. So you can't go from the shitty thing that happened to judging it. And then you get confused about whether you're listening to the inner critic or what is this voice. But if you create the space with, stop or something like that, and then you look back and go, what happened? And how can I improve or learn from what's happened? In your case, like, what podcast and how can I learn from the podcast? What are the gifts and what I've created? What are the opportunities to turn this into something different? But you can't do that if you have what happened and then you react.
Yeah.
You need the space.
So do you have practices that you use on a regular kind of daily, more like maintenance practice? Or do you have maybe a tool set that you use when like a big thing hits? Using the comparison maybe with health is like, do you exercise a little bit every day? Or do you have like a first aid kit for when you go down and you're bleeding?
I have a practice that I adhere to 2 out of 3 of these most days of the week. And the pieces are meditation, writing, just doing some journaling, not writing, just journaling, and running. Some days I'll do the 3 of them back to back. Some days I will do 2 out of 3, but it's rare that I miss those. I think I am a better person when I stack them and I start my day that way.
There's something related to the body, like a physical, I have to move the energy. I have to remember that I'm an animal in this vessel that I must care for. There's the mental work, right? Learning how to be present with yourself and observe what's going on without over-identifying or attaching to it. And then the third is some type of expression, but it's a creative expression that's not meant for anybody else. It's like a reflection or a play, or it's just something else. Seems to be like that's the primer for being able to even consider doing professional creative work or having a really creative lifestyle.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And I have my clients do some version of that for them also, because it feels like I'm not surprised actually to hear that that's how everyone does their best work. It feels like they're essential components.
Yeah, this is similar to what you did with the creative blocks too, is once you start casting a wide net and seeing, you asked yourself the question, how do creatives get out of their own way? Right. And when you amass all of this knowledge or all of this research, you start to identify, okay, there's common patterns here. And then the final question would be, do you have any words of wisdom that you would like to share with your younger self or somebody who's at an earlier stage of their creative transformation?
Yes. Trust that inner voice.
Yeah.
Learn to listen to it and trust it. Let it guide you.
And then finally, for people who want to stay connected to you and your work and all of the cool offerings that you're putting out there and evolving and seeing, being able to follow along in your journey, where is the best place for people to find you?
You can find me at brainchild-coaching.com or my name, laurieshiers.com. And on Instagram at Brainchild Coaching. So wonderful to talk to you, Brooke.
Thank you so much for being so open and present and honest and generous in conversation. I relate so much to what you're saying, and I think your story and the wisdom that you've developed along the way is something that I fully believe will support other people who are going through this oftentimes disorienting, confusing labyrinth of a process of coming back into yourself in a way that is sustainable and viable in the world that we live in now. So thank you for being a model and being a leader and for showing up so authentically and vulnerably.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.